Shalom, this is Daniel, and this is another episode of My View as a Jew. Today, what I'd like to talk about in this message is one of the most important passages in all of Scripture. It's brief, but it's very important, and it's been widely misunderstood. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about in the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 17, 18, and 19. This comes from what has been commonly known as the Sermon on the Mount, which took place in very close proximity to what most people call the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel. Most of the Arabs refer to it as Lake Tiberias. You know Israel, you know that the city of Tiberias is on the western edge. Most Israeli Jews call it the Kinneret. So, little geography lesson for you. But as far as the message is concerned, this is typically where people have drawn a line and said it is these words which Jesus, Yeshua, uttered, which from their point of view made the Torah or the law go away. He completed it. He did it, so therefore it's null and void, and it has no more relevance, and I certainly don't need to pay attention to it or what have you. So this is how the majority of Christians and non-Jews view this particular section of Scripture. So the question is, did he or didn't he? Well, we're going to talk about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through those verses one by one and give you my thoughts on them. And for the purposes of this particular message, I'm going to be using the NASB translation. Now, is that superior to every other one? No, I'm not suggesting that, because there are dozens and dozens and dozens of translations. So you have to pick one. What's important is not this particular translation. What's important is the thrust of the message that our Messiah was making when he spoke the words. Okay? So let's just dive right into it, and let me start off by reading verse number 17 from Matthew chapter 5. Quote, "Do not think I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill." Okay. First, let's talk about the word law. We'll get into the other stuff subsequently. The law is what's used to translate, okay, from the Greek, because the New Testament was translated into Greek. Greek did not have a word which absolutely synonymously equaled what Torah meant. And we have to keep in mind, Torah is what Yeshua was talking about, okay? So they came up with a word that has largely been translated in the overwhelming number of scripture verses as law. However, law is not the equivalent in terms of meaning to Torah. The actual meaning of Torah is teachings and instructions. Teachings and instructions. But that's the word that has been used overwhelmingly. So that's kind of what we're left to deal with. Now, what's important to understand, aside from the translation of law, is what he actually says in that first line there. "Do not think I came to abolish. I did not come to abolish." Now, Yeshua has spoken in parables on many occasions. He's not speaking in parables here. He's being very straightforward. So he leads off by saying, one, do not think I did not come. So he's basically saying two things very quickly, very dramatically. I didn't do this. I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets. Law, when I say law, let's just substitute the word Torah for that, because that's what he's talking about. So right away, he's making a definitive statement. I did not come to abolish. That's point number one. Point number two, he says, I came to fulfill. Okay? What is fulfill? Well, let's keep in mind who Yeshua is. One, is he a Gentile? No. Is he a Christian? No. Yeshua is a Torah-observant Pharisaic Jew. And when I say Pharisee, okay, that is a correct way of identifying him, because after all, he did have table fellowship with the Pharisees. And the Pharisees would not allow anyone to have table fellowship with them unless he was one of their own. So he was a Torah-observant Pharisee. Now, to fulfill, let's talk about that. What does that mean? Does it mean that he accomplished everything and therefore he put it in a suitcase and packed it up and sent it off to Timbuktu? No one has to pay attention to it anymore? No, I don't think so. He is the living embodiment of Torah in the flesh. No one kept Torah perfectly like Yeshua did. So he came as a living embodiment, a living example of Torah in the flesh. Believe me, he did not come to abolish it, and he made that very clear. So let's look at the next line, which is verse 18. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law, Torah, until all is accomplished. Okay, so what's he doing here? Basically, he's saying, just in case you didn't understand what I meant in the previous sentence, I'm driving the point home to say, look, heaven and earth are going to have to disappear before the Torah disappears. Well, let's look around. We're all still here. So why would the Torah disappear? If we're all still here, heaven and earth is still here. So he's driving his point home even further by saying everything that exists would have to be gone and disappear before the Torah disappears. So I think what the takeaway from that is Torah was, is, and will be. Was, is, and will be. Not gone. So let's now look at verse 19. This is important. Whoever then annuls one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Well, here he's holding out a carrot. And he's saying, look, my brethren, and let's just make sure we understand who he's talking to. One, he's a Jew. This is the Sermon on the Mount, which is in the New Testament, okay, which is largely seen as a Christian Bible, but in fact, the entire Bible is really a Jewish writing, okay? But he's telling his Jewish brethren right here, because that's who he's talking to. He did not have a ministry to the Gentiles. That came later. Apostle Paul, a.k.a. Shaul, who also was a Jew, that was his ministry. But Yeshua is telling his people in the Sermon on the Mount, okay, you have an opportunity here. You want to be the least in the kingdom of heaven? Then disobey and teach others to disobey. However, if you want to be called great in the kingdom of heaven, then obey and teach others to obey. Simple, simple as that. So the question is, what do you want to be called in the kingdom of heaven? Least or great? Now, I understand that you may be Gentile, If you are a Gentile, you're not Jewish, let me give you a little bit of my personal input here. Do you have to obey Torah? I don't think you do. And the difference between Jews and Gentiles is he is telling his own people, the Jews, that obeying Torah is critically important. There's a halachic obligation. Halachic is Jewish ritual, Jewish law, or what have you. So Jews do have an obligation. But Gentiles, if you're a Gentile, what I'm suggesting to you is you don't have the same obligation. However, would it hurt if you did? No. Is it going to save you? It will not save you. It will not save the Jews. We know how we are saved. Okay? We're saved by our faith in Messiah and his shed blood. So legalistic observation of the Torah is not going to save you. However, what is the Torah? What purpose did it accomplish? Well, one of the most important purposes of the Torah is it gave us an opportunity to understand what sin is. Because until all this stuff was written down, there wasn't anything that we could refer to. So it's kind of like a road map. It's kind of like an owner's manual, if you will, to how to live a faithful life. Now, once again, I'm not suggesting that Gentiles have the same obligation that Jews do. But like my late Jewish grandfather once said, it wouldn't hurt. Let me close by giving you this one last thought, especially if you're a Gentile. One of the ways we interpret discipleship is to emulate our teacher, right? Who is our ultimate teacher? It's Jesus, Yeshua. So discipleship implies emulating our master. Our master obeyed Torah. Now, does that mean that you're not a good believer if you don't? No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just giving you an opportunity to consider and pray about whether you, if you're a Gentile, should give consideration to obeying Torah. It certainly wouldn't hurt you in the least, and it may enrich your life. Well, that's it for now. I hope you got something out of this. Thanks for watching. Bless you, and I'll see you again.